Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We've got a quick but oh so important one today for you with our S14 and S15 front wheel hubs. Some people know and some people don't, but we tend to offer OEM replacement parts so that we can keep these geriatric shit boxes on the road across the world. And in this case, yes, we do make replacement front wheel hubs. Now, everything you need to know on these OEM bad boys is loaded up on the product page. So if you want to have a little look-see on what these hubs have to offer, head on over and get you some learning done for them brains of yours. In other news, we recently took our old girl up for a general check over and noticed the wheel bearings had seen enough Japanese mileage and abuse and need some general maintenance and or love. Now, a common thing that people tend to overlook and well simply might not know is how to check a wheel bearing to see if it needs to be replaced in the first place. As in some cases, you may have a wheel bearing that might seem okay from the outside but may sound like you're coasting through the bowels of hell. Anywho, to check said bearing and make sure it is the problem, make sure your whip is up and on jack stands safely. The first thing to do is to check for movement by gripping the wheel at the top and on the bottom whilst rocking it upwards and downwards. If you do have movement, then get a friend to peep on the inside and check that this is in fact coming from the wheel bearing and not everything else you probably left loose while installing your coilovers. If there's movement, you will see the rotor and hub move independently of the knuckle. This tells us that the wheel bearing is Captain Cooked. Anywho, while we're here, and for good practice I might add, we might as well check the other ways this bearing may be worn, which is to put your hands on the left side and the right side and rock the wheel left to right. This is commonly done to check the steering rack and components for any movement, but can also expose wheel bearing issues as well. The third method on this super thorough wheel check is to spin the wheel and listen closely for any deep noises that sounds like the bowels of hell you hear in the car whilst driving, which would be a deep whirring, growling, grinding sound. And the last method is to lift the wheel with both hands at the bottom, which is commonly done to check for a ball joint being worn or loose, but again can expose said wheel bearing being messed up or any other nasty movements. And as you can tell by DK's totally genuine reaction, it's a problem. Anywho, go ahead and zap off the wheel so we can attend to our injured wheel bearing. Now, handy pro tip, if you zap a wheel nut on the rotor, it will keep the rotor straight to save it from cocking and catching in your caliper when you remove it. Then the first thing you need to do is remove the two caliper bolts and hang that thing up and out of the way safely. Remove that handy wheel nut from the rotor, then remove the rotor. Now, if you look real close between the dust cap and the hub, you'll see the edge of the dust cap. This is where you would need to jam a chisel and or something sharp to pry that off the hub. Heat said chisel in and give it a baby tap, working that dust cap off. Then get somebody's rattle gun and zap that nut off, then proceed to slide the hub off the spindle. Be careful not to lose the spindle washer that's inside and put that thing somewhere safe for now. Get a rag or the t-shirt you got for Christmas and wipe down the spindle, getting that ancient Japanese grease off there that's probably been there since the late 80s and or 90s. Alright, now we can compare the two on the bench. And holy smokes, you can tell what 30 years will do to you with the dirty bowels of hell musical you've been listening to for weeks now. Now keep in mind, in the world of engineering, nothing is perfect as much as we want it to be. They're simply manufacturing tolerances between two items. In this case, the tolerance of the bearing to spindle are so goddamn fine that sometimes the spindle may need a slight whisk with sandpaper to clean up any super minor grooves and or edges. If your spindle has some marks on it anyway, it wouldn't hurt to give it a super light go over with some super fine grit sandpaper just to make sure she's so fresh and so clean. Now go ahead and smear some grease all over the top and all around with the lights turned on this time. Now in the engineering world as well, this also means the bearing may need some super slight and or super slight tapping with a rubber mallet to help coax it on, as the tolerance here are absolutely super fine between each other. In our case, the tolerance gods were looking over us, and as much as we'd want to add some adult jokes here, we're going to keep it clean, and that thing slipped right on in. That's definitely not what she said. The bearing being a tight fit isn't always a thing, but this is just something to keep in mind, my guy. Also what she said. Give the hub a spin and make sure nothing is getting caught and or making any noises. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that if you are fitting these hubs to one of our blessed GK front drop knuckles, that the S14 S1 comes OEM with a spindle hub washer, but the S14 S2 and S15 does not use a spindle hub washer. Our Gktech knuckles have been designed not to use the spindle hub washer, which means that if you're running our knuckles on your S14, S1, then the spindle hub washer does not need to be used. In this case, we're fitting these to OEM knuckles, so we would obviously reuse what we took off and would be reinstalling said washer because it is needed. Anywho, throw said spindle hub washer on, followed by the spindle hub nut, wind that on, and zap that ish down. Now grab the god dang longest torque wrench that you've ever seen and didn't even know they made this big, and rip into that spindle nut like you're trying to break the world deadlift record, like you could see our main man DK's doing right meow. Man, look at those guns, DK. Someone's been chowing down on some protein bars in the shop in his off time, and that's okay with me. Obviously, torque these things down to the specs shown on the screen, and don't actually try to break the deadlift record, please. Stop at the recommended torque rating. Once you've heard the torque wrench click and your back slip a disc, indent the OEM flange nut down, and then you can proceed to tap the dust cover back onto the hub. Now you can either whack the center with a mallet and indent the poor thing like every other S chassis has, or professionally walk it around on the edge nice and neatly with your chisel. Once that's on, throw the rotor back up and onto its newfound home. Zap the wheel nut on now that you've learned that handy pro tip from before. Doing this allows you to easily slip the caliper on the rotor in one fell swoop. Wind the bolts on through the knuckles, securing the caliper in place. Get them zapped down and torque those two guys down to the specs shown on the screen here. Then lastly, go ahead and throw the wheel back on if you actually planned on driving this thing. And guys, you're done. The S14 is shocked and in awe that it was getting maintenance done and not turned into another drift missile, and I'm sure your ears and hearts will be proud that you finally changed that old noisy wheel bearing out and can now ignore every other thing that's wrong with this car and the world in its current state. Speaking of what's wrong with the world in its current state, aren't these guys? These gems throw these videos together to educate, annoy, and entertain you with facts, or maybe not. Speaking of facts, if you didn't know what you're doing, please reach out to a professional to have help, or you can reach out to us via electronic mail and we'll help you out as best we can. This has been Officer Dan, Johnny Caps, and DK with another one of the world's finest how-to videos. We'll catch you on the flip side. Peace.